Just hours ago, the royal family was abuzz with shocking news concerning Charlotte, forcing Prince William to cancel a series of prearranged plans. The palace remained completely silent, while the unusual events continued to raise many questions and concerns from the public. What really happened behind the palace gates? And why was William's reaction considered so serious? Let's analyze the entire context and the most noteworthy details. If you are interested in clearly analyzed, selective, and well-considered royal stories, don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications to not miss the latest updates. The British royal family is accustomed to intense public scrutiny, but what just happened had a completely different tone. Not controversy, not a harsh response, but a heavy and emotional silence that enveloped the palace corridors. When the news of Prince William's abrupt cancellation of all his upcoming plans was announced without any explanation, royal observers immediately sensed that this was no ordinary decision. And then whispers began to spread. Sad news concerning Princess Charlotte had emerged, enough to immediately overshadow all other priorities. Before delving deeper into the true meaning of this development for the royal family, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next analysis. That morning, a brief announcement from Kensington Palace stunned royal reporters around the world. All of Prince William's scheduled activities for the coming days, including important diplomatic receptions, were postponed indefinitely. No reason was given. No further information. Just a definitive and unusual decision. Within minutes, social media was flooded with questions. Had Catherine's health taken a new turn? Or was the king facing another serious problem? The lack of context not only sparked curiosity, but quickly turned into genuine anxiety. Inside the palace, the atmosphere was described as suffocatingly tense. Staff were instructed to minimize external contact. Emergency meetings were convened in silence. Senior aides, who had witnessed many difficult periods for the royal family in recent years, said the moment felt unusual. Not chaos, but a cold, tight control. It was this deliberate silence that made everyone uneasy. This was unlike previous cancellations due to security or health reasons. There was no public warning, no medical announcement, and no official statement to reassure anyone. As Prince William completely withdrew from public view, familiar theories quickly emerged and were immediately dismissed. There was no indication of a security issue, no leaks related to past controversies. Everything led to an inexplicable information vacuum. And then, the first detail from an anonymous source began to circulate. According to this source, the decision to cancel the entire schedule did not stem from national responsibility, but from a deeply personal matter directly related to Princess Charlotte. No one said exactly what happened, but the mere mention of her name was enough to shift the focus of all speculation. The media immediately shifted its focus. Experts began scrutinizing Charlotte's recent appearances, school life, and rare public activities. The atmosphere of speculation grew heavier, carrying more emotion than politics. This was no longer a story about schedules or protocol, but about a family facing something private and sensitive. The most perplexing clue came from the last detail recounted about Prince William before he disappeared from official activities. An aide said he received a call, paused for a moment, then briefly stated that he needed to leave immediately. Everything else was left behind. That very moment made those familiar with the royal family realize that this time it wasn't about the crown or duty. It was a father's reaction to an event that no title could overshadow. This is no longer a story of royal protocol or imagery. This is the story of a father. And as the whispers grow louder, the events surrounding Charlotte unfold in a way that would leave any parent breathless. This places William before a painful choice, a choice no father would ever want to face. For Charlotte, that day began like any other. She had no idea that behind her familiar composure, she was unknowingly carrying a secret sealed in an envelope meant only for her. When she opened it, something within her seemed to crumble. Its contents were not for the public, but powerful enough to shake Charlotte's world and leave her father utterly stunned. The envelope arrived silently, without ceremony, without royal insignia, without warning. Just a pale package placed among Charlotte's familiar books, delivered through an internal channel, bypassing all usual procedures. Even her closest caregivers were not informed. It was sent directly to her, in unfamiliar handwriting and at an ominously chosen time. Inside was a handwritten letter, devoid of formal language or decorum, but of trembling, urgent words. The writer was a distant relative, a figure who had existed only in faint whispers, who had long since left the palace circle. Not because of scandal, but because of a prolonged silence. The opening sentence weighed heavily. "You have the right to know things I have never been allowed to say." The letter was neither harsh nor mournful. It carried a chillingly calm tone, as if the writer had accepted a truth long ago. The words spoke of things that had been hidden, of anxieties passed down through generations, and of signs that, in the writer's opinion, should no longer be ignored. There was no specific diagnosis, no medical conclusion, just a vague warning, yet powerful enough to sow fear in the mind of a child who had never thought of herself as different. Up until that point, Charlotte had considered herself a normal girl, sometimes tired, sometimes more sensitive than her friends, occasionally dizzy or dreamy, things any child could experience. But the letter suggested that it might not be so simple. It alluded to a recurring pattern in family history, anxieties that had been kept secret, and the possibility that time might reveal everything in an undesirable way. Charlotte didn't cry. She didn't scream. Those who saw her later said her face turned pale. Her posture faltered slightly, as if she had just lost something intangible. Her eyes were empty, and she silently left the room, asking permission in a very low voice before disappearing. Just minutes later, a message was sent to William. The message was brief but urgent. "You need to come immediately. She's not well." William dropped everything. No hesitation, no delay. Witnesses recounted rushing through the private corridors, calling his daughter's name, ignoring all familiar security procedures. When he reached the closed door, the knocking was initially light, then quickly became frantic. The moment the door opened, William's face said it all. No announcement, no explanation needed. He understood that the letter contained more than just information. It was a mental burden, a warning, and a major question about the future. What Charlotte had just read not only confused her, it raised a series of questions about family history, about things that had been kept secret, and about the path ahead that might be different. The Windsor royal family had long protected their privacy, especially sensitive matters concerning health. But Diana's legacy, in this story, is depicted not only as memories and emotions, but also as unspoken anxieties. And Charlotte, though no conclusions have been reached, suddenly becomes the focal point of that unease. Soon after the letter surfaced, whispers reached the ears of senior advisors. Silent exchanges began behind closed doors as the palace tried to control information and protect a child from the wave of speculation outside. But for William, the moment was beyond all calculation. This was no longer a royal story. This was a moment a father was forced to confront his greatest fear. The contents of the letter, though never officially confirmed by any party, are believed to have hinted at the possibility of a rare genetic factor, not as a conclusion, but as a medical hypothesis that had been left open for decades. According to legend, it was a series of vague signs that appeared sporadically throughout the family tree, not limited to any single branch of Diana's family. Behind the radiant, captivating image of the late Princess of Wales, biographers believed there existed a complex health history, with dizzy spells, heightened sensory sensitivity, and periods of unexplained exhaustion. At the time, much was attributed to mental stress, prolonged tension, or the psychological issues common in the royal environment. However, according to sources close to the palace, there is growing belief that these manifestations may only be the tip of the iceberg of a deeper, more genetic story that has never been fully understood. Diana's father, Earl John Spencer, was noted to have experienced prolonged periods of weakness and nervous sensitivity. But medical records from that time are fragmented, largely sealed under privacy agreements. No clear diagnosis has been published, leaving only disjointed pieces and unanswered questions. According to those familiar with the situation, Prince William, perhaps with the intuition of a son who had witnessed his mother's silent suffering, paid particular attention to his daughter's health during routine checkups. Fleeting symptoms such as mild dizziness, sensitivity to light, or moments of distraction were reassured by doctors as normal during adolescence. But according to a former aide, as time went on, these signs didn't disappear completely, but became more apparent, causing a growing, unspoken worry. Years later, the letter supposedly connected those disparate dots, pulling them back to Diana's past. What made it so shocking wasn't the emotion, but the argument. Based on publicly available medical documents, family accounts, and biographers' notes, the writer presented a speculative but coherent picture. It wasn't proof, but it was enough to stir concern. In a short time, medical experts were reportedly consulted discreetly. Additional assessments conducted in absolute silence, with no public schedule, no leaks. According to internal sources, the level of caution at this point was undeniable. The goal wasn't to confirm anything publicly, but to rule out any potential possibilities. What affected William most was not necessarily the scientific theories, but the memory. He had witnessed his mother facing unanswered questions, lived in a state of helplessness when everything was shrouded in silence. Now, the mere thought of history repeating itself was enough to make him unable to remain indifferent. Someone who had heard him confide that he said the feeling brought back memories of past losses. And this time, he was determined not to let ambiguity and concealment create another painful cycle. While professional assessments took place behind closed doors, another wave of speculation began to form outside, threatening to overwhelm the palace in the face of public opinion. Amidst the headlines and rumors, the human element was often overlooked. Catherine, still limiting her public appearances during her recovery, was believed to have absorbed all the information in silence, as a mother before as a royal figure. And that very silence has led many to wonder, what is the family facing behind those closed doors? And how will they choose to protect their child from the storm of public opinion that is gradually building up? This information reportedly shocked even the closest aides, signaling that this was no longer a private family matter. For Catherine, it was the moment she realized she was entering a struggle unlike any she had ever faced before. A struggle to protect her daughter's dignity and mental well-being. The message reached her in the rare quiet of the early morning. William had not yet returned. The palace was shrouded in an unusual silence. An envelope was handed to her, not through official channels, but by a longtime aide, his face tense, his eyes averted. Catherine didn't need to ask. She simply nodded slightly, took the letter, and requested to be alone. A few minutes later, the door to her room closed. The space inside became completely isolated. The room was locked from the inside, and the silence continued until a decisive command rang out. She demanded the removal of all media. No phones, no screens, no news, no sound. Catherine didn't want to be surrounded by speculation or commentary. She wasn't seeking explanations from the public. What she needed was clarity and absolute control over what her daughter was facing. Outside, those standing nearby recounted hearing suppressed sobs, then a shattering sound, as if something had been thrown in a moment of overwhelming emotion. Some even said she repeated a single sentence, almost whispering to herself, "She's still just a child and doesn't deserve this." Catherine was used to pressure. She had faced relentless media scrutiny, rumors, and years of prolonged image crises before. But this time, it wasn't about roles or responsibilities. This was the pure pain of a mother. Her protective instincts surged. Almost immediately, she issued a directive that defied familiar conventions. Charlotte would not appear at any upcoming events, public or private, formal or symbolic. No more schedules, no more cameras, no more staged moments. The palace's relentless image machine would pause. For Catherine, her daughter was not a symbol, but a child in need of protection. Longtime staff later admitted they rarely saw her so emotional. For the first time since facing her own health challenges, Catherine allowed herself to break down. She wept uncontrollably, without restraint. One staff member said it was a moment when she was no longer the Princess of Wales, but simply a mother grieving for her child. And when the tears subsided, her familiar decisiveness returned, sharp and unwavering. Catherine proactively contacted William directly via a private, secure line. The message was brief, straightforward. Everything had to stop. Not adjust, not delay, but stop completely. William, who was with Charlotte at the time, didn't ask for further explanation. He understood immediately. The call ended, and he began canceling all his previously arranged commitments. But canceling appointments was only the first step. What followed is said to have caused profound turmoil within the royal family. Behind closed doors, William made a decision that surprised many and drew considerable opposition. Despite advice from his advisors, he canceled important diplomatic meetings, postponed meticulously planned trips, and left his schedule blank for an indefinite period. What stunned his staff most was his cold but decisive statement. If she fell, then everything he represented would be meaningless. In the days that followed, expectations for William remained undiminished. The palace had prepared a series of diplomatic activities, high-level meetings, charity events attracting international media attention, and even a major environmental conference where he was expected to be the central figure. But amidst all these plans, his priorities shifted, and that decision, according to many sources, opened a new period of tension, not only for the royal schedule, but also for how the family chose to protect their dearest loved ones. Everything had been meticulously arranged to reinforce a sense of stability, a message to the world that the monarchy, despite facing turmoil, remained strong. But William chose a different path. When his advisors entered the room to finalize the schedule, they were met not with the usual compromise, but with an unprecedented firmness. He didn't suggest a postponement. He demanded cancellation. Event after event was removed from the calendar, commitment after commitment withdrawn, until Charlotte's condition was clarified, handled cautiously, and, most importantly, until she was truly stable mentally. Stun spread throughout the room. Courtiers pleaded, argued, even warned of damage to the royal image. But William remained unwavering. He spoke directly without hesitation. If what they needed was a beautiful image, then imagine the heir to the throne turning his back on his daughter while she was suffering, and then presenting that to the public. Behind closed doors, tension quickly escalated into panic. Assistants raced against time to find alternative solutions. Suggestions followed. Perhaps Catherine would send a handwritten message. Perhaps George would make a brief appearance alongside his grandfather. Or perhaps Charlotte's condition could be downplayed with a general health reason. All were rejected by William. External reactions followed immediately. Senior officials warned of serious diplomatic consequences. Calls poured in from international partners expressing bewilderment at the abrupt cancellation of plans and the disruption of commitments. But William's stance remained unchanged. He reportedly told his closest associates that if anyone tried to exploit his daughter's grief for damage control, he was prepared to withdraw from all roles and titles. Within the family, cracks began to appear. Some argued that William was letting personal emotions overshadow his responsibilities, damaging the royal image. Others, particularly those close to Catherine, supported him, believing it was time to put people above etiquette. But William didn't seek consensus. He didn't wait for permission. He wrote a direct letter to his father. The words were concise and straightforward. He was not just a prince, but first and foremost a father. If Charlotte was struggling, he would be there for her. Everything else could wait. And from that moment, the lines were drawn. No more interviews, no more tours, no more staged appearances to maintain an illusion of stability. With that decision, William broke with long-standing tradition and inadvertently redefined leadership, not by legacy or ceremony, but by protection and love. However, while he struggled between his duties and responsibilities as a father, another pain silently emerged. It was linked to Charlotte's very ordinary dreams. Dreams that transcended the palace gates of performances, science competitions, playgrounds where children could be themselves. Her childhood had once been full of aspirations and excitement, but in an instant, all of it became fragile. What Charlotte was facing was not simply a health issue requiring monitoring, but also brought with it harsh limitations. This meant she might have to put aside her dreams. For months, Charlotte had quietly practiced for a special ballet performance. It would be her proudest moment, a stage where she would pour her heart and soul into it, with a seriousness and determination far beyond her years. She trained in silence, to the point that even her instructors were surprised by the discipline, grace, and passion emanating from each movement. And that's what makes the current reality all the more heartbreaking. Every night, Charlotte practiced quietly until the lights in the hallway dimmed. Sometimes, Catherine would stand by the door frame, silent, watching her daughter turn in the quiet. It was never about seeking attention. It was pure passion, a place where Charlotte felt truly herself. Ballet wasn't a duty but a joy, her own voice. And then, that little world had to come to a halt. After a series of discreet examinations, the doctors reached an unavoidable conclusion. Charlotte needed a strict, prolonged, and absolute rest. Any form of exertion could have lasting consequences. Her condition, they warned, had to be carefully managed. No performances, no high-intensity training, no pressure associated with the expectations of royal life. Not now, not in the near future, probably for a very long time. That decision came like a blow. Extracurricular activities were halted one after another. The meticulously designed curriculum was postponed indefinitely. Royal etiquette training plans were scrapped without discussion. A path that had been laid out suddenly vanished. For the first time, Charlotte clearly felt the meaning of carrying a legacy she couldn't control. But what hurt her most wasn't the canceled schedules. It was the question she whispered late one night, her voice trembling so much it almost dissolved into the air. "Does this mean I'll never be able to be queen?" William held his daughter's hand tightly. Between responsibility and pain, he answered slowly, his eyes welling up with tears. "You are always greater than any title." Those standing silently outside the door later admitted that it was a moment that brought tears to their eyes. Because then, Charlotte was no longer a symbol of royalty. She was just a child, seeing her world shrink, clinging to a little solace amidst uncertainty. A few days later, without a word of announcement, Charlotte gave her beloved ballet shoes to a younger cousin. No ceremony, no camera flashes, Just a quiet gesture, but it said it all. For her, it wasn't simply giving up an activity. It was letting go of a dream she had believed in with all her heart. But the pain didn't stop with Charlotte. It spread throughout the family, silently testing the bonds, the trust, and even the image of a royal family that always appeared strong. As the little princess withdrew into silence, the royal silence became heavier than any newspaper headline. King Charles and Queen Camilla offered no response. No visits, no calls, no public or private messages. And it was that void that exposed the cracks that were hard to conceal. Amidst all this, William still clung to a faint hope. Not hope in a king, but in a grandfather. He waited, believing his father would at least contact him. The night passed in silence. The next morning, the aides were forced to admit what no one wanted to acknowledge. No planned visit, no private message, no sign of concern sent through the palace's security channels, only a prolonged silence. Meanwhile, Camilla appeared at a lavish charity lunch, smiling for the cameras, chatting with guests as if nothing had happened. Charlotte was not mentioned. When someone cautiously inquired about her, she responded only lightly, presumably with a shrug. Children get sick often. That's normal. That statement, when leaked, made the already tense atmosphere even colder than ever. The appearance of a particular figure at the event that day immediately ignited controversy on social media. Public reaction was swift and intense. Many comments criticized what they considered a cold and insensitive attitude. Some even suggested that Charlotte was being treated like a minor detail in the vast machinery of the royal family, where image and protocol always take precedence over a child's feelings. But behind the palace doors, the atmosphere was far more tense. William was reportedly furious. He wasn't seeking support as an heir to the throne, but as a son seeking protection from his family. He had requested discretion and unity, hoping the royal family would close ranks to protect Charlotte during her most vulnerable period. However, according to internal sources, Charles was preoccupied with other matters: constitutional reviews, high-level appointments, and an important conference in Edinburgh. When briefed on the situation, he reportedly responded curtly that William had handled it well and everyone should continue focusing on their assigned tasks. A close aide recounted that William bitterly exclaimed, "If it were George, they would have been there immediately." This wasn't just a lament. It reflected a feeling of abandonment, an implicit accusation of bias, and a hierarchical system where duty always took precedence over family ties. Catherine, already emotionally exhausted, reportedly reacted harshly. She demanded minimal access to Charlotte and made it clear to her staff that this was not the time to turn a child's pain into a publicity stunt. Internal divisions grew increasingly apparent. Courtiers tried to diffuse the situation, advising Charles to make even a small gesture to appease public opinion and mend the family. But he did not change his stance. Whether the reason was protocol, distance, or simply personal choice, it left a lasting impression. The silence from the throne was no longer seen as a mere oversight. It was interpreted as a message, and that message made William feel more isolated than ever. It was in this context that an unexpected turning point occurred. Not from advisors or media strategy, but from Charlotte. Despite her young age, she made a decision that stunned even her parents. Charlotte proposed publishing a handwritten letter to the public. It was both an expression of her feelings, a sincere sharing, and a hope that the truth, however difficult, would become less painful over time. The decision wasn't part of any plan. It came from her, gently but decisively. After days of media frenzy and when her silence became the subject of endless speculation, Charlotte sat down before a blank sheet of paper and wrote in her own voice. She didn't ask for permission to appear. She only wanted to be heard. The letter begins with a message to all girls like me, a short phrase that blurs the line between royalty and everyday life. From the very first lines, the message is clear. This isn't a story about titles or glamour, but about identity, about the anxieties of growing up under a gaze that constantly demands perfection. Charlotte writes about the fear of not being strong enough, about the feeling of being lost when the future seems uncertain, and about the sadness of familiar dreams silently fading away. But alongside the pain is a rare resilience. She shares that strength lies not only in keeping going, but also in knowing when to stop. Courage sometimes means saying no. One sentence in the letter, which later went viral, resonated with many. Even a princess needs to pause sometimes. The statement quickly spread across platforms, not as a cliché royal message, but as a simple truth that everyone could relate to. Social media exploded with support. Messages, letters, and shares from children and parents alike poured in, thanking Charlotte for her sincerity and courage. She reminded them that pausing doesn't mean failure, and that listening to oneself is a form of strength. Mental health activists publicly sided with her, viewing the letter as a gentle yet powerful reminder. Many organizations around the world have spoken out, acknowledging the palace's rare decision to allow the girl's voice to be heard in its entirety, unedited and unsoothed. This time, a royal child was not placed behind her usual protective shell. She was seen for who she truly was, fragile yet courageous, fearful yet unyielding. The letter concludes with a single sentence, a simple promise that deeply touched the hearts of millions. "I will return when I am stronger, I promise." It was both a farewell and a vow. And with those few short words, Charlotte gave the nation what it had lacked for weeks: hope. However, within the palace, the repercussions of the letter spread far beyond. Not only was the public moved, but the very foundations of the institution were shaken. Advisors who had previously considered Charlotte's situation a private matter were now forced to confront a publicly revealed truth. For the first time in decades, the monarchy had to confront a question it had avoided for too long. As the public gradually accepted the reality of Charlotte's situation, the palace also recognized an unavoidable prospect. What would the future be like without her? In the corridors of power, nothing could remain unchanged after such a moment. As Charlotte's future became uncertain, the succession plans no longer seemed immutable. And for William, the pain of the present was silently painting a completely different tomorrow, a day when love, not just legacy, might be the ultimate choice. Whispers had begun before the letter was published, but they quickly escalated into a wave. Many believed that William was not merely delaying his duty, he was reconsidering the very structure of the royal future. For centuries, the order of succession had been considered immutable. But behind closed doors, William began asking questions no heir had ever dared to admit. What if they didn't want to shoulder the burden? What if they deserved the right to choose their own path? Sources close to him said William had discreet conversations with reform-minded advisors in the days following Charlotte's message. Though described as hypothetical discussions, the atmosphere was profoundly serious. He expressed concern about the pressure on the royal children, about inherited roles that left no room for renewal or individuality. He questioned what needed to change to reshape a monarchy that could adapt to the emotional needs of the future rather than simply repeating tradition. All eyes turned to George. At a very young age, he was unexpectedly placed in longer meetings, more intensive ceremonial training, and receiving attention at a higher level. He began appearing at events his father had previously tried to shield him from. Some saw it as a necessary shift, others felt it was happening too soon. But what no one could deny was that change had begun, and it was happening at breakneck speed. Meanwhile, Catherine's influence grew increasingly evident, albeit subtly. With calm composure and quiet strength, she began to promote a new narrative of a more modern monarchy, one that prioritized mental health, consensus, and flexibility. She spoke privately with staff, encouraging the empowerment of the next generation so they could become more than history had dictated. It wasn't a noisy rebellion, but a profound and enduring movement. For William, things had truly changed, not just because of the pressure, but because of Charlotte. Witnessing his daughter confront, break down, and then rediscover her voice opened up an unprecedented clarity within him. He no longer saw the crown as destiny. He saw it as a responsibility, and perhaps more importantly, as a choice. In a rare moment of emotional outburst, William reportedly shared with a close friend that Charlotte had helped him realize what mattered most. Not how the world saw them, but how they would protect each other when no one was watching. That realization was not merely reflection, it was a profound adjustment. And while there has been no official announcement, its impact is undeniable. The monarchy may retain its familiar outward appearance, but internally, the structure is shifting. The crown still gleams, but behind that aura is a father, a daughter, and a family forever changed. Thank you for watching the video until the very end. If you found this content meaningful and thought-provoking, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next stories. Every support you give is a motivation for the channel to continue bringing you more quality and insightful content. Please leave a comment below to share your thoughts or suggest topics you would like us to cover in the future. Thank you sincerely, and see you in the next video.